recording. I'll send out an email with the slides and also a copy of the recording afterwards. Please feel free to share it with anyone you know who might be interested or who couldn't make it today. Thank you so much for joining us to talk about ending hunger and fighting racism and giving us a chance to elevate some of the work that our panelists today are doing in Nashville and beyond to address hunger and racism in their communities. My name is Emily. I'm from the Tennessee Justice Center. We're a nonprofit law and advocacy organization. Hi, welcome. I work at the Tennessee Justice Center, which is a nonprofit law and advocacy organization, and I'm on our anti-hunger team. So we focus on ending hunger by protecting, strengthening, and improving access to food assistance programs like SNAP, formerly known as food stamps, and WIC and school meals. So that's the basis of our work. We do quite a bit of work directly with clients, helping them access the programs. And then we also do quite a bit of advocacy too. So if y'all are in need of any assistance related to the food assistance programs or are interested in anti-hunger advocacy, please feel free to reach out to me after the call. I'd love to connect. My contact information is on the last slide, but I also wanted to introduce our co-sponsor for the event, Everybody versus Racism. Leah, do you want to hop on and introduce yourself?
Hey, everybody. Thanks, Emily, and thanks so much to all of the panelists for joining us today. Can't wait to learn from you all. I'm Leah Sherry. I am the Chief Operating Officer at Everybody versus Racism. And at EVR, we believe in creating a just world where it's everyone's goal to beat racism. We tackle the most difficult racial issues, and we challenge ingrained racial assumptions and call out inequality wherever we see it. We believe in social change often and everywhere. And something that's really unique about our organization is that racism has become such a polarized issue, unfortunately, but we really work strategically and through innovative methods and a lot of programming to involve every single person in tackling this issue, because it does take everybody to make real change. And we're so excited to be a part of this first of the 3 series of Everybody Eats. So thank you again to Tennessee Justice Center and everyone else who's helping make this possible.
Thanks, Leah. And I'm not sure if Gerald is on the line yet. Do you know if he's on, Leah?
I'll give him a call. Oh, there he
is.
Hey,
Hey, everybody. Hey, sorry, I was just running out of a patient's room, but I'm Dr. Gerald Noah. I'm the CEO of Everybody versus Racism. It's a pleasure to work with the Tennessee Justice Center on Everybody Eats as we together as one group, one people, work on trying to solve some of the issues that are plaguing us as humans today, racism being one of them. And I think that for me, and I think the Tennessee Justice Center feels the same, that tackling these issues like racism and discrimination starts at the ground level. And some of those ground level components that we have to address are things like hunger, real estate, access to education and healthcare and things like that. So I am excited about this 3-part series, and I want to thank everybody for coming, and I look forward to dialogue and doing things after that.
Thanks, Everybody versus Racism, folks. We'll go ahead and get started, but I wanted to let everyone know this definitely, we want it to be a collaborative call. So if at any point y'all have any questions, or if you hear someone say something and think your work really parallels it and you have something to share, please feel free to put it in the chat box and Leah will uplift it. Or if you feel comfortable, you can go ahead and get off mute and share with the group. All right, so before I turn it over to our expert panelists to talk about the work that they do and how we can join them in fighting hunger and racism in our communities, I wanted to give a little bit of overview of hunger and what it looks like and what some of the causes are, just so we have a little bit of context for the conversations that we're about to have. And specifically to talk about who is experiencing hunger at higher rates and why that is happening. This is by no means an exhaustive list of reasons why folks experience hunger or racism, but it's just meant to be a starting point for us to facilitate conversation and to set up our panelists to talk about the work that they do. So we know that Black and Brown people experience food insecurity at much higher rates because of systemic and structural inequities that perpetuate cycles of poverty. And we see that across the data. So 24% of African Americans are currently experiencing food insecurity, which is 3 times that of white households. And 19% of Latin American people are currently experiencing food insecurity. So why are certain groups of people experiencing food insecurity at higher rates than others? A lot of it boils down to systemic and structural racism. So 3 causes that I wanted to highlight today are mass incarceration, redlining and housing discrimination, and employment discrimination. And like I said, this is by no means an exhaustive list, but I wanted to highlight some of the reasons why we see higher levels of food insecurity in Black and Brown communities. So for mass incarceration, Black Tennesseans make up 16.8% of the state's population, but they make up 44.1% of the prison population. Incarceration often results in job loss and debt from court costs, making it difficult to afford nutritious food and other basic needs upon release. And also specific to our work at the Tennessee Justice Center, depending on what you're convicted of, it can affect your eligibility for the food assistance programs like SNAP, making it even more difficult to access nutritious food for yourself and for your family upon release. The next one, redlining and housing discrimination. Historic and current discrimination practices perpetuate areas of concentrated poverty in Black and Brown communities. Underfunded schools, poor employment opportunities, and over-policing create barriers that perpetuate generational poverty and make it difficult to afford food. We see a lot of folks in our work having to make difficult decisions between buying food for themselves or buying food for those that they care for, like children or grandparents that they may be caring for, and also making difficult decisions about buying food or paying for important prescription drugs or housing costs, things like that. The final one I wanted to elevate today is employment discrimination. A wage gap persists in the United States as Black and Brown people, especially women, make significantly less than their white counterparts. Discrimination in hiring practices also limits employment opportunities. And we know that in order to buy healthy, nutritious food, folks need access to money to buy that food. So that's where employment discrimination really comes in. So thinking about all of this as systemic and structural qualities that perpetuate these cycles of poverty and keep people in a cycle of food insecurity, I want to turn it over to our panelists to talk about how they see hunger and racism intersecting in their work, what they're doing about it, and how we can take action to help them cultivate change in our communities. So I want to turn it over to our panelists right now. We're going to start. First of all, thank you for being here. Y'all are such a wealth of knowledge on this topic, and we're very grateful for you taking the time to talk to us and share your work. First on the line today, we have Elizabeth. She is the Community Engagement Manager at the Nashville Food Project, and she's got a few slides for us here. So I'm going to stop talking and turn it over to Elizabeth to share a little bit about her work.
Yeah, thank you so much, Emily and Leah and just the whole crew. I'm feeling very humbled and excited to be here and have this conversation with so many other people. Like she said, my name is Elizabeth. My pronouns are she, hers, and I am the Community Engagement Manager at the Nashville Food Project. The Nashville Food Project is a Davidson County-based organization that strives towards a world where everyone has access to the food that we or that they want and need through a just and sustainable food system. And we do that through growing, cooking, and cherishing nourishing food with goals of cultivating community and alleviating hunger in our city. And so I think for the purposes of this, this time with y'all, just wanted to explicitly note that we understand and know that a just and sustainable food system cannot occur without uprooting systemic racism. And so when we think about hunger as one of the many symptoms of an unjust food system. And so our work kind of spans into these different touch points in the food system, which it often manifests as hunger, but also shows up in different ways once you dig into kind of more of a food system as a whole network. Let's see. As I was gathering my thoughts for our time together, I came across this quote that I love. And it says, calls to fix a broken food system assume that the capitalist food system used to work well. This assumption ignores the system's long racialized history of mistreatment of people of color, concentrating power in the hands of a privileged minority, and passing off social and environmental externalities disproportionately to racially stigmatized groups. So the work I'm going to kind of highlight today that TNFP's work exists in the reality of is really highlighting ways that we are striving to disrupt some of these racially charged barriers in the food system work and the way people access and consume food. However, we recognize that this work has to happen outside of us, and it's interdependent work that has to happen collectively. And one of the things that we talk about a lot when we're introducing folks to our work is kind of some of those numbers that Emily shared about the prevalence of food insecurity, specifically in Black and Brown communities, but then juxtaposed with this idea that 40% of all of the food that we produce ends up in a landfill. And so what this does for me, and the invitation that I have for people to step into, is that this is a myth of scarcity, that hunger is a scarcity issue. And I think even maybe myth is too gentle a word for it, because it ignores the disproportionate impacts that this has on Black and Brown and low income communities. The idea, if we kind of package things as a scarcity issue, it attempts to hide food insecurities, ties to low wages, lack of affordable housing, quality transportation, and accessible health care. And I think if we recognize that there's enough food to meet the needs of our neighbors, and yet it's ending up in the landfill rather in the hands of folks who need it, we have to start exploring how hunger and food as a basic human right is being leveraged and used as a measure of power and control. And so one of the things that when I work with students or when I'm talking to groups, I really encourage people to think of is if there's a situation or social injustice that seems like it has an easy answer, to ask ourselves who benefits from this. So the question I continually think through and wrestle with myself and invite others into is this idea of who benefits from hunger. Because if it's not a scarcity issue, then we have to start looking at people's continued lack of access to high quality food as a means of power and control. One of the ways that we seek to, in a small local context, disrupt and highlight the fact that hunger is not a scarcity issue is by our food recovery and community meals program. Every year, our team cultivates relationships with restaurants and grocery stores and farmers to anticipate when there's going to be excess, intercept that excess while it's still good and usable, and quickly incorporate that into high quality meals that are then served alongside impactful justice work in our communities. Last year, we recovered over 200,000 pounds of food. This is food that was already in our communities. The resources to cultivate it or to even ship it had already been used, and it was in this space. And we were able to use that as a resource to create meals for our neighbors. Our meals were served alongside work, deep community work, nonprofit efforts, organizing work through grassroots communities, and mutual aid efforts. And so our hope is that we can leverage food to support some of the deep community work that is going to address some of the structural causes of not only how do we keep people from being hungry, but why do people continue to be hungry? Like, why are we continuing to perpetrate a system that keeps people hungry? And last year, we served about 234,000 meals and snacks with over 61 partner sites. And so one of the things we bring our community, we bring our volunteers, we bring our financial supporters along as in each steps of this work. And what that does is create conversations and new awareness of the idea of disrupting this narrative as food as a scarcity issue, which invites us to consider deeper how scarcity and hunger that's facing Black and Brown communities has, roots in systemic racism. So I was talking with my coworker, Lauren, and we were talking through land access work that our team does. What we really started thinking about is that a just food system has to mean that people have the power to define their own foodways. And Alicia Garza, who wrote The Purpose of Power, defines power as the ability to make decisions that affect your own life and the lives of others, the freedom to shape and determine the story of who we are. And power also means having the ability to reward and punish and decide how resources are distributed. And what we see is through a racist system and a food system that's really thrived on racist practices, there has been the power in those foodways has been stolen and disconnected. And so we know that right now over 100,000 acres of farmland is lost annually in Tennessee. We know that nationwide, only 3% of all US farmland is owned by people of color. And then 85% of all US farm workers are from Latinx communities. And then on the flip side, only 1.4% of agricultural land in the US is owned by Latinx peoples. And why this is really important is this idea that the folks who are doing the labor of the food system, the folks that are cultivating the food, that are the folks that are in touch with the lands, are not the same folks who are benefiting from the power of the food system. So there's this disconnect between the people who are doing the work and the people who have the power to define foodways. And so we continue to, our agricultural programs are leaning into small ways to locally disrupt some of these tensions. So we steward 3 urban agricultural sites in the Nashville area. In our community garden programming, over 80 families grow food and gather in these spaces. These are spaces of connection to the lands, connection to culture, connection to spaces of community. And they're also opportunities to cultivate food for your own family and have more control over the foodways that affect, your direct family and community. Many of the gardeners that are part of our programs choose to grow culturally significant items that are part of their history and their traditions, and that may be inaccessible or cost prohibitive otherwise. And so while this is on a micro scale of individual families finding more power in their foodways, it's a way that locally we're able to push back against this long history of people losing power in their own foodways. In our Growing Together program, it is a small garden off of Haywood Lane, and it is actually the home of 6 farmers who came to the US with incredible agricultural skill as refugees from Burma and Bhutan. And they wanted to continue agricultural work in a way that financially benefited their family. And so we provide access to land by leveraging our resources to lease that property. And we also provide language support and marketing resources. And they grow and cultivate food to not only feed their communities, but also to generate income for their families. One of the ways that we push back on ideas of white supremacy is that in our garden spaces, we aim to prioritize cultural knowledge and lived experience and make sure that the spaces and the frameworks that we create serve as places for connection, skills sharing, and food cultivation. We're also continually looking for ways to lean into and uplift community leadership through community advisory councils and other types of paid leadership opportunities. And so this is just a few snapshots from our agricultural programs. And one of the things that my coworker said, who works specifically in our agricultural programs, that I think was really impactful is there are wider extensions of our work things that need to happen, not tied to our institution, that'll be necessary to actually transform the system. So we recognize that the very fact that we have the privilege and the resources to access lands that might not be accessible to the general community, particularly Black and Brown communities, or have access to excess food that other people are not able to just go to the store and access for themselves. We recognize that that itself is the symptom and an example of an unjust food system. And so in this current space, we're taking ways to disrupt those trends and also to shed and bring light and conversation to the ideas that these systems will need to be shifted beyond us in ways that we don't act as gatekeepers. Yeah, that's what I have for now.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I want to be mindful of the time of the other panelists, but also want to be mindful of the fact that Elizabeth is amazing. So I want to pause and give folks a chance to ask her questions about her work or anything that she said that you're interested in, or any parallel work that folks on the call are doing that they want to help with.
Elizabeth, I want to focus on something that you said earlier in your slides, that 40% of all food ends up in a landfill.
Yes.
And I'm wondering what percentage of that food would it take to feed, I don't know, let's say the communities in Nashville, or if we're talking nationally, the communities across the country, if you have that answer.
I don't, but that is a great question, which I'll dig into and see if I can find if anyone has done that specific research. I think there's also what we recognize is that because we have a very a food system that has been moved into like industrialization and led by corporations, we have great overproduction in certain areas of our food system and great underproduction in others. And so there's this tension of available food versus food that people want and need and is culturally relevant. And so I think there's like a lot of nuance there that I'm interested to see if there is research out there about that. So thanks for bringing that up. That gives me something to dig into.
Oh, thank you so much.
If you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. I'm excited to hear the other folks on the panel. I feel humbled to be in this great lineup, and I'm excited to learn more from y'all.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Can you drop your email in the chat box too if you haven't already, so if folks want to connect with you after the call, they can. Thank you. All right, I want to turn it over now to Luis, who is the policy coordinator for the Tennessee Immigrant and Refugee Rights Coalition. Thanks for being here with us today.
Yeah, oh my gosh, thank you so much for the invite. So thankful for all of you taking time and joining us here today. Elizabeth, that was incredible. That's going to be hard to follow up on, but I am so excited to share this space with all of you incredible people. So yes, my name is Luis Mata, he, el pronouns, and I'm the policy coordinator with the Tennessee Immigrant and Refugee Rights Coalition. So we are a statewide immigrant and refugee-led collaboration. Our mission is to build power, amplify our voices, and organize communities, right, to advocate for our rights. Our vision is for a stronger, more inclusive Tennessee, where people of all nationalities, immigration statuses, and racial identities can belong and thrive across the state. And specifically the role of the policy team is to lead and implement our campaigns and advocacy efforts right at the state, local, and federal levels, in a collective and intersectional manner, right, with the directly impacted voices, directly impacted members across the state at the forefront of our work. So yeah, I really wanted to just share a little bit about, kind of the global context that we see, with the intersection of, hunger and migrant justice, right? So talking a little bit about that global context, but then also localizing it. So what does it look like here in Tennessee and in the work that we're doing? And what is that work that we're doing and how folks can get plugged in? So yeah, basically, what we always say is, right, migrant justice is climate justice, is food justice, right, is racial justice. And so that is why we're even more excited to be here today talking about this and what it is that we can do as a collective to address this in our communities. So across the globe, right, people are being forcefully displaced from their homes on a massive scale, right? There are estimated 68.5 million displaced people worldwide, including 25.4 million refugees and 3.1 million asylum seekers. So during periods of conflict, hunger may be both a cause, but also a consequence of forced migration. Now, for example, we see a lot of folks coming and resettling here in Tennessee who spent years in refugee camps, right? So refugees in these refugee camps worldwide are facing a rising hunger challenge, right? Due to the harmful conditions of these camps, but also due to like funding gaps, right? And we've seen this exacerbate during the COVID pandemic. Significant shortfalls in funding that we've been seeing, across East and Southern Africa, as well as the Middle East, are due to, forced ration cuts, right? Because of the lack of funding upon some of the most vulnerable in our world, right? And disproportionately, this impacts Black and brown folks, as Elizabeth and there are other folks have mentioned. So also, what we're seeing in Yemen, right? The Yemen food emergency there. And the thing here is, despite ongoing humanitarian assistance and humanitarian efforts that we've been seeing, the reality is that 17.4 million people in Yemen are food insecure. And the number of this is going to continue increasing, with a projected number of 19 million food insecure folks by the end of this year. So as we can see, basically overall, the tools currently used to respond to forced migration are insufficient. All right. And that is because of the fact that these are usually focused on technical, short-term humanitarian responses, rather than, of course, addressing the root cause of hunger, addressing the root cause of forced migration, towards a long-term impact on migrants. So with that said, how does that look like here? How can we localize this issue? So over the last few years, over the last few decades even, Tennessee has seen some of the fastest growing immigrant populations in the country. Tennessee is known as a new destination state. So a lot of folks, worldwide are looking at Tennessee as a place where they want to go to, where they want to raise their families, where they want to be involved in our community, right? But the thing is that, again, the reality is that, immigrant communities often struggle because of the institutionalized lack of access to basic needs and freedoms, right? Enjoyed by most of Tennesseans. And additionally, pervasive discrimination that we're seeing, subtle, overt, and the intentional marginalization by policymakers, who view these, newcomers and folks who want to resettle in Tennessee as less entitled, right, to live and prosper here. And what we've been seeing, especially the policy team who spends the first part of the year at the legislature, is that it's just continuing to exacerbate, right? Legislatures continue to introduce legislation that aims to create more and more barriers, not just for migrants, but for all marginalized communities across the state, right? Whether it's through calls to defund the refugee resettlement program here in Tennessee, or what we saw this year, there was legislation that aimed to take back state control of the program rather than having organizations who are on the ground leading it. But we're seeing that there's an increased, more hostile environment, not only at the legislature, but of course across the state regarding access to basic needs for migrants. And what we've seen, not just in Tennessee, but at the federal level, kind of what Elizabeth was mentioning, was this theory of scarcity, right? Where people and institutions of power can dictate who is and who isn't deemed eligible for certain resources, essentially creating that scapegoat of immigrants as the pretext for this white supremacist dynamic. So in addition to these deliberate attacks, what we're seeing is it's kind of like a two-pronged issue here, right? So it's like we're seeing these proactive, deliberate attacks against migrants, right? But we're also seeing that there's just a lack of infrastructure across the state. So an example was the pandemic EBT, and we worked really closely with TJC on this. But during the pandemic closures of schools, it led to students and families becoming, going food insecure that relied on food from schools. So during this moment of insecurity, right, Tennessee continued to increase the barriers there, right, requiring an additional application for to be able to benefit from being able to get food, whether or not the schools were closed, essentially, right? And what we saw was that in different states, this barrier wasn't created. So this was, again, a deliberate action by the state of Tennessee to require this, a more redundant application process, right? That would lead to more folks going food insecure that relied on this, on the food from schools. So we worked together, we filed a complaint, and, we were successful in this. But basically with that is also, what we were seeing, like in that application process, was the fact that there was no language accessibility there, right? It was just all in English. And, that ties into all of this, right? Because across the state, we're seeing this lack of language accessibility that is tied to these basic needs, like food, that also adds to what we were seeing with the public charge rule coming from the Biden or the Trump administration. Whenever they tried to exacerbate this public charge rule, which basically made it to where migrants who seek a certain type of benefit could be faced with harmful, consequences, right, in their immigration case. And a lot of times whenever they try to, the first issue is they try to access these benefits, but they don't have that language accessibility there to be able to benefit from that. But then once that part is covered, they're faced with this, thing at the federal level that's basically saying, oh, I'm sorry, you still cannot access this because it will have collateral damage on your immigration case, right? So basically, as a result of all of these factors, right, Turk has been on the ground and in community for almost 20 years, aiming to disrupt these white supremacist structures of detention, deportation, immigration enforcement at all levels, while also simultaneously creating a Tennessee, where we can all thrive, where we all have access to opportunities, whether if it's through advocating for language accessibility, providing needs assessment to migrants and new arrivals that we've been seeing, in just these last few days and weeks, or, urging investment in Black and Brown communities. Our main goal is to build that pro-immigrant, pro-refugee infrastructure across the state towards a greater sense of belonging and welcoming in the whole state of Tennessee. So again, thank you all so much for letting us be a part of this conversation. Again, more than happy to expand on anything I mentioned and have a discussion. So again, thank you all so much for that. I will also drop my email in the chat. Would absolutely love to collaborate with you all and have a deeper discussion on all of this. So thank you all again so much.
Thanks, Luis. We appreciate the work that y'all are doing, and thank you for uplifting a lot of those issues that you discussed. And I wanted to circle back to the language access issue real quick. That's something that we see a lot in our work as well. And we have a coalition focused on increasing access to food and the food assistance programs for immigrants and refugees. And that's one of the main issues that we're focusing on is language access. So if any of y'all on the line are interested in increasing language access and being a part of advocacy in that realm, please feel free to reach out to me afterward, and feel free to reach out to Luis too, because he's definitely a wealth of knowledge on that. But if y'all have any questions for him, please feel free to put them in the chat box and we can continue the conversation there. But for now, I wanted to turn it over to Joshua Mundi, who is here with us today from Pivot Technology.
Can you see me? I'm here.
I can see you.
I don't think they can, or if they can. But hey, everyone, my name is Joshua Mundi, CEO, co-founder of Pivot Technology School. Pivot is a tech workforce development company. We focus on 3 areas: data analytics, software development, and cybersecurity. And I believe that hunger starts with one thing, income. And a lot of individuals are not or undertrained and don't have the skill sets that they need to survive in today's society. So we work with organizations, companies like Amazon, Shipt, major Fortune 500 companies to figure out ways that we can upskill their current workforce, as well as we work with individuals in the community to give them the skill sets that they need so they can thrive. So one of the partnerships that I want to really speak on is a partnership that we have with SNAP benefits. So anybody in the state of Tennessee that receives SNAP benefits can go through our program free of charge and can go get those skills so that they can level up their income. So we take individuals that are generally making about $30,000 to $35,000 a year and take those individuals to making about $65,000 to $70,000 a year. So when we talk about income gaps and wage gaps and racism and hunger, all that is rooted in income. It's all rooted in not having resources or not being able to live in the cities that they grew up in. So if you look at Nashville and how Nashville is progressing, it's progressing in a way that you would think that you would have a certain face to hunger, but you know, your teacher may be hungry because, hey, it's so expensive to live and rent is $3,000 and, you know, it's just too expensive to live in the city. So you have to really address all different types of hunger, but it's addressed through tech and is addressed through income. So we work with another partnership that I like to talk about is we have a partnership with Core Civic, which is a prison system, the largest private prison system in the country. And we're working with them to add Pivot Technology School in those facilities. So individuals that are going to be released within the 6 months will be able to go through our program so they can leave with a skill set so that we'll stop that pipeline of getting out. I think it's called revisit. I can't say the word, but yeah, recidivism. There we go, recidivism. But it stops that where they're coming in and out because they don't have the skills to really survive in this environment. So that's kind of like what we do. We've been around since about 2019. We've graduated over 150 to 200 people. We're currently working with just the state of Tennessee to figure out ways that we can use tech to really solve a hunger problem. So how do we create an app? And I've been talking to Dr. G about creating an app that addresses where opportunities are for them to, you know, see where the food is available, where the food pantries are, to see where the fresh produce is. So working on that kind of tech and thinking about ways that we can address it from a tech perspective. But we're addressing it from a skill set perspective and looking at more ways that we can give individuals the skill sets that they need so they can get the jobs that they need so that they can really survive in the market and in the world. So that's a little bit about what we do. I keep it short and sweet, but that's a little bit about what we do. We're available to help and we're open to partnerships. So we're really trying to expand our market share. So we really focus in on the minority community, specifically at the African-American community, but we really wanted to look at how do we tap into the Hispanic community? How do we tap into different types of communities that are experiencing skills gaps and as well as experiencing hunger and how we can solve that via training and via tech. So that's it.
Thanks, Joshua. Can you pop your email in the chat? Because I know I definitely want to connect with you, so I'm sure that other folks will too. We have a moment. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Dr. G.
No, I just wanted to focus in on something while Josh is putting his email in the chat. I thought that talking about technology and hunger was so important. That's why I reached out to Josh Mundy about getting on this panel. Because if we're going to solve these issues, the issues of our time, we have to raise the boats up to the time that we're in, if that makes sense. And so what I mean by that is because technological advances are literally driving what's going on in the world, they're going to play a large part in the solving of the issues that we have, including racism, including hunger. So when Josh and I were talking about, well, how do we solve or at least contribute to solving this hunger issue, the thing that we talked about was, okay, we need to be building applications, platforms to, one, direct people where to go, where they can get things like fresh produce and food and things like that. But also in addition to that, We need to be able to distribute information centered around being hungry, where you can go for shelter, and other things like that. And so, in my opinion, that levels the playing field. And that's what we really want to do. Now, we know this in the back of our mind. We won't be able to solve all of the racial hunger, food, housing shortages overnight. But if we can keep etching away little pieces of at a time at this thing that we call racism, discrimination, which are the canopy of all these things that we're talking about now, then I think that, in a few years, we will see a significant difference. I say all the time, I'm not looking for 100%. I'm looking for 2% every day. And if you scratch away 2% every day, eventually you'll get to that 100%. So that's why I thought that the technology was so important, because that will propel us into the advancements of solving this hunger issue that we have and this racism issue. Thank you. Thank you so much, Josh.
Thank you for having me, bro.
Thanks, y'all. Okay, please continue the conversation in the chat, but for now, I wanted to turn it over to our last panelist who's with us here today from the Food Research and Action Center. Vijay, do you want to share your screen so you can share your slides, or?
Yeah, I'm gonna do that.
Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing so you can share. I made you a co-host, so you should be able to go ahead.
Okay. Just bear with me a sec. Okay, can folks see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, I'm gonna try to do something. I'm gonna try to put myself on presenter mode, which might mean you see my notes, but I'm not sure.
Right now we can see your calendar.
As I sort of figure this out. To give you a little bit of background, my name is Vijay Das. I am the Senior Government Affairs Lobbyist with FRAC. So FRAC is the Food Research and Action Center, and we're based in Washington, D.C., and we do a lot of work thinking about hunger in America, and our real primary focus is trying to end hunger. So a lot of our work is focused on policy research, advocacy, communication tools, and just we have a wide network of folks, one of them being many of you on this call that think about issues around all the federal policy solutions we could implement better, enhance, and build around to tackle hunger in America, because a lot of these issues are not new. And I'm really encouraged to see folks on this call think about the issues surrounding structural racism and race in the economy as it relates to poverty-related hunger, which FRAC has been working around for quite some time. So this is a little bit about what we do. I'll move to the next slide. If there's any interruptions in my quality of internet, just let me know, Emily, and by text or something.
I can't see your slides right now. I don't know what
Oh, really?
folks are seeing, but I'm seeing, it looks beautiful, but I'm seeing a building with
Oh, okay. Then let me just
I think it might be your background. Okay.
Yeah. Can you see it now? No?
Yes, I can see it now. There we go.
I'm gonna stop sharing and share again. So.
Okay.
How about now?
It's loading. I can see it now.
Okay. So I was on this screen. Can folks see this screen?
Yes.
Okay, so this is a little bit of what I was describing what FRAC is about. What I'm in, I've been with FRAC for about a year. I've been doing a lot of work related to thinking around these questions around race in the economy for quite some time. And I just want to draw your attention to what we are all focused on right now as it pertains to what's in the news. So if you weren't paying attention, which I don't blame you, there's been a lot going on right now. The White House actually, coincidentally, as we talk about these issues, put together a conference that centers itself on discussing issues related to hunger. And so Breck put out the statement, and within the conference, you'll see President Biden actually made a few remarks regarding the importance of this event, because it's almost been half a century since the last one of these, which inspired a lot of different federal programs, including the National Lunch and Breakfast Program to launch. You'll see that FRAC has been involved in sort of pushing forward a couple of key recommendations when it comes to hunger. And as it relates to what I think it pertains to this conversation today, I'm gonna focus on just one piece of what FRAC is working on the Hill when it comes to childhood hunger. But we work on a whole issue when it comes to the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, which was mentioned earlier on SNAP, which is basically different types of programs to provide people cash benefits to purchase groceries, and then also a lot of the other types of federal programs. But when I am thinking about what campaigns everyone else on this call to get really active on, I'm really thinking around the childhood hunger crisis in this country. And of course, there's racial disparities inherent in that. So, if there's any more information that you'd like regarding FRAC's role in this conference, just feel free to reach out to me, but I'll just move right along, because this conference actually comes on the heels of discussing the pandemic's relationship to the hunger crisis. And you'll notice that in this graph that I put together, like, actually hunger has been sort of plateauing with some ups and downs when it comes to food insecurity over the years, particularly the last 20 years. And it's actually been improving until you'll see the recent blip. Of course, the pandemic has taught us a lot. And one of them, if you ask any parent in America of what they are seeing when it comes to the school lunch programs or all the kind of innovations that have actually had to happen because of how many people were impacted from the economic issues around the public health emergency, one of them has been, and which has been something we've been really happy to see, is universal free lunch. So what that means is every kid doesn't have to go through the normal paperwork process to be able to get access to school meals. And that's been really amazing, as many parents have talked about how they're not having to worry about not only budgeting for school lunch, but also think about other issues related to the shame of their kids not being able to afford lunch and the whole issues around lunch school debt. So all those issues actually have been put aside, and there's been a lot of campaigns to make that program permanent. Unfortunately, given the makeup of Congress, we weren't able to have a year extension of that program, even though we're still living in the pandemic. But I just want to flag that because that's important in context to what we all know is important for the childhood hunger issue, which is getting meals out before, after, during, and after school. So you'll see the issues right now, the last few years, as I just sort of zoom right along, you'll notice that there is an increasing gap, which, like all these other issues when it comes to families on the front lines of the economic toll of both from a frontline worker perspective of the crisis and all the issues related to who's actually having to withstand the impacts of COVID directly through work and who's not. And it's sort of a travesty because we were doing a lot better over time, but there's also been an opportunity because we also know that these issues are systemic and we need to be tackling about how to improve all types of hunger programs, namely the child nutrition programs. So FRAC has really been working on a number of campaigns. I mentioned one around childhood hunger, childhood nutrition. In we're in the throes of right now. So, we're in election season. Congress is doing a lot of things as they sort of think about what to do after the election and close out the year. One of the campaigns FRAC needs, we're all very concerned about, is the reauthorization of the child nutrition programs, because it deals with a lot of things you're already aware of, whether it becomes the school lunch program, the summer programs, which is the kind of things we've been seeing around the grab and go, where students have been able to access meals when programs are out, and how that extended through the summer, how childhood hunger increases oftentimes when kids are not in school, because that's how kids get meals, particularly kids of color. And then you're thinking through a lot of after school and adult care meal provisions that the federal government boosts. So these are all part of the child nutrition reauthorization bills. And there's been some progress, but I'm going to just sort of highlight where we need to go. This summarizes a little bit of the child nutrition reauthorization. I can provide more detail later. I just want to have some time for questions. And I should mention that as I was saying, that Congress is trying to move this along. The House, which is democratically controlled, of course, has actually put forward a bill that FRAC did some analysis on. You could see it here. And this has been something FRAC has been working with colleagues in the Education and Labor Committee that's charged with putting this out. So you'll see, FRAC was actually pretty happy with a lot of what we saw coming out of this. It does a lot to deal with issues coming out of the pandemic and thinking around what permanent solutions can be. So I encourage folks to check it out. In the interest of time, I'm going to just sort of let you know where the Senate stands. So the Senate is really in this holding pattern. So we know that the child nutrition reauthorization bill needs to be voted out in the House, but we're very, given the makeup of the Senate, you can imagine being 50-50 and the need to get 10 Republicans on something that has historically been bipartisan, but is being championed by Democrats, is how to deal with childhood nutrition programs and investing in them into the future. We have a lot of work to do for the Senate Agriculture Committee to actually take up a version of this bill. We are very well, FRAC just sort of well positioned to know that, working with a lot of folks who happen to be in Republican-led states, there is an appetite to deal with these issues, particularly coming out of the pandemic, because we saw the hunger issues grow. But we need some kind of activity in which everyone is sort of contacting their senators and pushing them, particularly those in the Agriculture Committee, to get moving on a version of the bill that both Democrats and Republicans are happy with. And I should say that, while many folks in this call, for example, might be saying look, my senator is Republican, what does that even entail for me? I will say that there is a lot of work to be done, even working with your Tennessee member and your Tennessee senator, because they have influence with the chair and Senator Bozeman, who ultimately will be deciding the fate of this bill. And so if you are inclined, there's a couple resources. My email is there if you have more questions about what FRAC is thinking about next steps. But the action alerts give you sort of language and more details about what's in the bills I sort of flew through. And then also how you can dial them up and dial them down depending on the negotiations that's inevitably going to happen. And then some things where everyone can just sort of share social media, toolkits, and others to just get people more informed, educated, and activated so that they feel like they can move on this. I will say that time is of the essence. This bill has not been reauthorized in 12 years. It's been expired for nearly 7. As the Senate is focused, and the House and Senate are focused on next year, that means that there are other nutrition priorities that are going to be part of what we call the Farm Bill. That's ultimately going to be taking up a lot of time. of the offices. So we really have 2 months to act on doing a lot of things coming out of the conference that the White House and many participants who care about hunger were at, and thinking about making sure that no child actually goes hungry, which inevitably is going to happen. And as the racial disparities are increasing because of the pandemic's fallout, we unfortunately can't be responsive to. So I'll stop there. If there's any questions, feel free to email me or put in the chat.
Thanks so much for being here.
I know we're very pressed for time. I think we only have 2 or 3 minutes. BJ, I want to ask you a question. I want to ask it in front of everybody, but you and I can talk about it outside of the discussion. But I'm starting to wonder whether or not we should rely on government to try to feed our people. And so that's a very huge fundamental dilemma that I'm having with myself, but that's something that we can talk about later. I'm wondering if the people, without any bureaucracy and politics, can come together and do the job as human beings and not as some political pundit or some type of tool to get points. So that's something we can talk about later, though. Emily,
I do think the conference actually brought a lot of folks in the civil society and private sector philanthropy together to sort of think about things that are divorced from how messy our politics are. Unfortunately, Doctor, it just the scope of the problem is so huge that we're going to have limits in terms of what direct service and other types of philanthropic projects can do. We really want to reach kids, we got to go through public policy. And that's just the lessons I've learned over time.
That's an interesting conversation. I'm interested to see where that goes. I think that, and folks, if you need to jump off the line, go ahead. I'm okay to stay on for a little while longer, and we're still recording, and I'll send this out after, so we can continue conversation and send to folks afterwards. But I think going off of what you said, Vijay, that a lot of these racist structures are inherent in a lot of the laws and policies that we currently have. So in order to disrupt those racist systems, we have to engage with disrupting the laws and policies that exist. So that's my that's my 2 cents. But I wanted to open it up to the group to see if there's any questions from any of the panelists. And I also wanted to highlight that this is a 3-part series. So for those of you that are in Nashville or near Nashville, next Thursday, we'll be hosting a panel at Soho House, and I'll send out the link in the follow-up email to register for that. But make sure you pre-register for that one, but we'd love to see y'all there. And I also wanted to give space to Leah and Dr. Gerald in case they had any closing remarks for y'all.
I just wanted to say that, yeah, thanks everybody for the really engaging conversation. I think something like we mentioned a few times with Everybody versus Racism is we really do believe that it takes everybody. It was really clear on this panel and in these questions and comments in the chat that not just the panelists, although they certainly bring so much value to this work, but every single person here today and all of our networks do too. We all have skills and networks, and it just takes us being very creative and innovative and doing this collective impact together, using the tools that we have and coming together to meet this larger goal. So thank you everybody so much. We will be sending the panelists a few more questions if you all have capacity to answer, just about creating a pretty digestible action plan for takeaways out of this panel. And we'll be emailing that. Emily, I know you're emailing out the slides, so maybe we can create a nice succinct email to send to everybody here today. And obviously, if anyone is digesting this right now and needs some process time and has questions, really looking forward to reading those and getting some responses. So thank you.
Everything that Leah said.
All right, y'all, if there are no more questions, we'll close out today. But huge thank you to all the panelists for being here today and for Everybody versus Racism for co-sponsoring. And we hope to see those of you that live in Nashville at our panel at Soho House next Thursday. Thanks, y'all. Have a good one.